One of my favorite things in the world to do is watch Friends. I know it's been off for years and years. It's not even around, but I still find myself binge watching old episodes. And I was thinking about this today and thinking, it's the predictability of the friends in the circle, right? You have Chandler with his quirkiness, Monica with her type A of just everything has to be so neat and tidy and organized. It's Phoebe's ability to make you laugh at her silly songs. Ross always comes in with those smart comments, and Joey and him and his food, like it is just so hilarious. And of course, Rachel, she just brings everybody together, and it's just such this beautiful, cohesive team of people. And it's why I wanted to come on and share with you today that I have an opportunity for you to find your friends in the content creation space. So if you are thinking about creating your first or your next digital course, I don't want you to miss this opportunity because Amy Porterfield just opened the doors for registration for her Course Confident Bootcamp. And I'm actually offering a special bonus for anyone that registers for the Course Confident Bootcamp through my special link. So I want you to go to crystalprofit.com/Amy-bootcamp to register. That's crystalprofit.com/Amy-bootcamp. And what you're going to find when you get there is I have this special bonus private podcast series. It's called Money Mindset for Creators. So I want you to go register for Amy's bootcamp, download the podcast, and immediately start listening to it, because what this training is set up to do is to help you get your mind right about monetizing your content, making money so that you can fuel your content creation dreams. So go to crystalprofit.com/Amy-bootcamp to register for Course Confident. And I cannot wait for you to find your friends and find the people that will be there for you. Do you see what I did there? Yeah, nice little friends segue connection. Go to crystalprofit.com/Amy-bootcamp. And I cannot wait to see you inside. Okay, let's get into today's episode. So I have had so many people reach out and ask me, when are you going to give us a deep dive on Podcast Movement Evolutions 2023? So that is what today is all about. I actually polled our Instagram audience as well as the Facebook group, and I heard back that y'all wanted to hear about podcast ads and AI. You wanted to hear about video podcasting as well as brand deals. Like, how do you get brand deals for a small audience? And I just have so much to share. Like, I was literally going over my notes and thinking, there's no way I'm going to get all of this into one episode and have very tangible takeaways, but we're going to try. Okay. Like, I'm going to try to give you 3 days recap in one episode. So let's get right to it. Welcome to the Profit Podcast, where we teach you how to start, launch, and market your content with confidence. I'm your host, Crystal Profit, and I'm so excited that you're here. Thanks for hanging out with me today, because if you've been trying to figure out the world of content creation, this is the show that will help be your time-saving shortcut. So let's get right to it, shall we? Okay, first and foremost, Podcast Movement Evolutions this year was in Las Vegas. And it's funny because this is only the second time I've ever been to Vegas. My husband and I went in November 2020 for our anniversary, and it was a very different experience. It was still lots of mandates, lots of restrictions. There were not a lot of things open in November 2020. So this one, was definitely different, but I gotta be really honest. We didn't hardly leave the hotel, like, at all. It's a 2-hour time difference whenever we were there, from Houston to Vegas. And y'all, I mean, you know me, like, I love to get up early. I am a character of routine, and it just totally threw me off. So I was tired. I was tired a lot of the time that we were there. But it was so much fun. I came back thinking, oh my gosh, I just drank from a fire hose, and have so many new ideas and so many fun things to share with you, but I feel a little overwhelmed with how many new things that I learned. And I wanted to share some of those with you here today without overwhelming you, right? So we're just going to do a super high level of everything that happened, all the fun talks that I attended. And if you're watching the video, then you're going to see some pictures and fun things behind the scenes that I shared. So make sure you check out the video after you listen to this. But okay, let's just dive right in because like I said, we have a lot to cover today. So the first day. So this was a really fun talk. We started with podcast ad creatives, how the industry can be more efficient and effective. So this was like right out of the gate. It had the words AI in it. So I was like, okay, we gotta go to this one. Sounds super fun, really cool. And I have to tell you, AI is the buzzword of 2023, right? With ChatGPT and all the other things, like people just want to know, how can I use this tool to my advantage? And it's funny because, I mean, these tools have been around for a while, right? You have one on your phone you probably talk to regularly. You have one that's probably in your kitchen or your office or your bedroom that you also talk to regularly. I'm not going to say their names, right? Because they're probably going to wake up and start talking to you. But this has been around. It's just a new way of using AI. But what I learned in this talk is they were talking about how can advertisers use these tools to their advantage. And what they were talking about is using AI voices. And it's funny because, we get a little squeamish when we think about like, oh, I don't want to be replaced by, a robot or, some machine. But at the end of the day, these aren't to the level of that yet. I'm not going to say that they won't be ever, but they're not there yet. So I look at this as like a learning opportunity of, well, how can I make either my ads or my podcast episodes or any pieces of my content more specific to me where I'm not worried about an AI or a robot or something else taking my job? And I think that that's what you should think about too, is what are some of the things that you can do to infuse your content with more of you? And I like to think about it with stories and other personal examples and other things that aren't just facts and figures and information, because that is literally like the definition of, robots and AI. It's data. And whenever you can pull in more of your story and who you are into the mix, then it's just going to help you stand out from the robots. I know this sounds like a weird conversation, but it's true. It's what I kept thinking about the whole time I was in this talk is podcast ads. Yes, we're starting to see some AI generated content, but I don't think it's not there yet. Okay. We'll say that. That was the biggest thing. My biggest takeaway is it's not there yet. But I do think that we should continue to watch this and look at it and see how we can use some of these tools to our advantage. All right. That was the first talk. The next one. So this one was called View from the Top. And I'm going to read you this little description. It says, podcasting is changing fast. This panel brings together leaders from across the podcast industry to discuss what's happening in podcasting. So I wanted to share a little bit about who was there. So this was James Cridlin, who he has Pod News and Pod News Weekly, which are a great podcast if you're interested in learning what's going on in the industry. Then we had someone from Amplify Media, Wondery, Tenderfoot TV, and Guggenheim Partners. And they were talking about, so it was a panel, they were talking about how things are happening in the industry. And they were really specifically talking about the financial impact of the larger like macroeconomic podcast industry, where these bigger players like Spotify, Apple, Google, like all the really big ones are starting to gobble up some of these smaller companies, right? They were talking about mergers and acquisitions that have been happening, or some of the other, larger players that are coming through and gobbling up the smaller ones. And it's all a good thing because it means it's an infusion of investment dollars and the financial commitment to podcasting. but it also was very super high level. I don't think that the majority of this audience probably even cares about it that much, other than you should just know, like, the major takeaway from that is people are investing in podcasting. And it's just another reason for you to not be worried that the industry is going away or that, their focus is somewhere else. Like, this is a good thing. It's a very good thing to know that people are paying attention to podcasting. So really, really fun. That was the big takeaway from that talk. The next one is how to talk to yourself, lessons learned from 1,000 podcast episodes. And this was my talk. So a lot of fun. Of course, I'm going to have lots of things to say. But let me just read you my little description. It says, podcasters want to create content with confidence. Let's all feel less awkward talking into a microphone or camera when no one else is around. You'll walk away from this talk more confident in how you talk to yourself and your audience. So what's really funny is I'm recording this right now, talking to myself, right? Talking into a camera, talking into a microphone, completely by myself. Nobody else is in here. And I had several people come up to me afterwards and say, the number one takeaway from this talk was knowing that it's okay to be awkward. That just made me so happy, so happy, because a lot of this talk really centered around, we don't really like our own voices, and it's something that really is awkward. Like, even if you're a trained public speaker or you're someone that's been on stage, like I literally learned in college how to break down a presentation and present it in front of a boardroom or in front of a large group of people. And so presenting on stages and presenting, with a microphone in my hand, like all of that, like it felt so comfortable to me when I'm in front of a bunch of people. But when you're behind the mic and it's just you, like it gets awkward, it gets weird. So it was great to share my experience there and just let you know, like, this is my reminder to you, like, it's okay to feel awkward recording your content, recording your podcast. It's totally normal. And it was just so fun. I love talking to beginner podcasters. So this was an incredible talk. I had so much fun. And for a little behind the scenes, because I've shared previously, my speaking coach, Heather Sager, and one of my best friends,
Being a woman in business comes with its own unique set of challenges, but also so many opportunities. We get ahead by leaning in to what makes us different from business as usual. I'm Samantha Hartley, host of Profitable Joyful Consulting, inviting you to a special 6-episode series exploring the experience of being a woman in business. You want to hear from women consultants who've hit $1 million, who sell 6-figure engagements, or who've broken their own revenue ceilings? Yeah, those are my clients, and they'll be sharing too. Join me for 6 must-listen episodes that tackle key challenges for women consultants.
Follow Profitable Joyful Consulting on your favorite podcast app.
Kept telling me, she was like, I want you to go from a good speaker to a great speaker. And this is the talk that I've practiced more than any other talk I've ever given. Like, I literally practice it for a week straight. Like, every single day I did this talk. And I can tell you that this delivered, like, it hit home. So if you're practicing your podcasting, you're practicing a major talk, you're practicing anything, it pays off. It totally pays off the more that you practice. So just want to throw that in there. And of course, a little shout out to Heather. Just like blended our first and last name together. Shout out to Heather Sager, because she helped me so much. So thank you. All right. So the next talk, building podcast franchises. So maybe you're like, well, what the heck is a podcast franchise? What does that look like? So I'm going to read this description to you. It says, what makes a podcast a franchise? How can podcast creators engage fans and grow their fandom beyond the podcast content? Hear from Wondery's head of franchise development, Nicole Blake, and other franchise creators from Smartless Media and Ballin Studios on how they are growing their brand and podcast content to further the fan experience for audiences. Learn about how to deeper engage fans and expand your IP beyond the podcast. Yes, you heard that right. SmartLess Media was there and they had a big presence. Like there were people. So in this talk in particular, it had their CEO and president of SmartLess Media, which if you don't know, the SmartLess podcast, I've talked about it many times. We've done a case study here on the podcast about it. I'll link in the show notes to it. But they talked about so many cool things. So they actually didn't even have a CEO or president of their media company, I think until about a year ago. And then they hired this person on and he came in and really kind of monetized their brand in a much bigger way. Like they, brought on the live tours that they did, which behind the scenes, they created a documentary. So that's going to be a docuseries and just so many other fun things. They just released their merch. Like they have hoodies and t-shirts and all these things. So they are taking their brand from just a podcast to now it is other things, right? It is the merchandise. It is virtual in-person things. Like it is so much bigger than just a podcast. And I just had so many takeaways. One of them was, and actually the franchise development person from Wondery worked on Harry Potter. Whoa, right? Like what a brand to work with like such a large fan base, right? I'm sure you're like, oh my gosh, Harry Potter. Like everybody knows what Harry Potter is because they did such a great job like branching out. It's kind of like, Harry Potter is like the next Star Wars. And I feel like there is just so many like ways that you can commoditize your brand and have this just reach that goes so much far to infinity and beyond. That's really what came to my mind than just what you're creating in an audio file. So my biggest takeaway was make once, monetize many. And I thought this was such a good phrase. So I'm going to say again, make once, monetize many. And so the idea behind that is what can you do to repurpose your content and monetize it? What can you do to take something and strip it out and use it in a different way? So these aren't new concepts that we haven't talked about here before. I just love the idea of how it was framed in that let's take what you're already doing and figure out a way to monetize. So for anybody that's listening or watching this, you can think about it as like, well, what can you do with this content? Can you put it in a webinar? Can you add it to one of your paid products? Can you create a paid product out of what you're teaching? Can you take a few podcast episodes and create a course out of what you've already done? So the idea isn't always create from scratch. Like you are using the things you've already done and you're going to monetize it that way. So awesome talk. I love this so much. I loved hearing from all these industry executives on how they look at podcasting and content creation because it kind of helps me get a pulse on the bigger macro podcasting industry. All right, this next talk was super interesting. Hang on, I'm going to get a little sip of coffee. So this talk was called Making a Podcast to Get a TV Deal? ? You were thinking about it all wrong. And I saw this talk name and I was like, who's thinking about making a podcast to get a TV deal, right? So I want to give a little sidebar. Even though this conference was in Vegas, there were so many people from LA. So many people from LA and New York, like these big media companies. And I live in the world of independent podcasters, right? Like if you're listening to this, you're watching this, you probably run your own show yourself, or you do it with you and maybe a few teammates, like a virtual assistant or someone that's your content manager, or, a small team of producers. Like you aren't going to have these studios behind you. You're probably recording in your office or, maybe in a local studio, but you are not going to, hey, I'm going to invest, $500,000 in creating this podcast. So whenever I saw this talk, I was like, I have to go see what they're talking about. So I'm going to read this description to you. It says, podcasting must stand on its own and be respected as a mature medium before translating IP to television can even be considered. So let me back up real fast. I've mentioned IP a few times. If you don't know what that is, that's your intellectual property. And that came up so many times where everybody just kept saying IP, IP, IP. And while I know what that is, it's not like an acronym that I use on a regular basis because, again, I'm not that kind of in the industry that way. But I just want to throw that out there. So podcasting is not a scrap heap for scripts that have languished in development or docs that never got the funding. It's its own medium with its own quirks and its own way of captivating audiences. Good stories will ascend. In this session, we will talk about why creating a good audio story first is essential before even thinking about television. And so when I looked at this, I was so confused. I was like, what are they talking about? And then I remembered how many shows have been adapted to TV series. So if you watched the We Crashed, which was so good, it was about WeWork. It was Anne Hathaway and Jared Leto. It was on Apple TV Plus. Oh my gosh, it's so good. So that was a series that was adapted from a podcast. And then The Shrink Next Door, I think that's what it's called. The one with Will Ferrell and Paul Rudd, that's on Apple TV Plus as well. And then there's other shows that they've made from podcast. These were all podcast first. And so when I look at that, I think, oh, there's a whole subset of people that are out in the world that are creating content to turn into a TV show. And I don't think of that first because that's not the realm of the podcast industry that I live in. Like there's probably people listening to this right now. It's like, oh, I never even thought about making that happen. But it's funny because I got to sit there and listen to all these talent agents and reps from TV studios like Universal and Lionsgate. And I started thinking about a book manuscript that I wrote in 2017. And I was like, oh my gosh, I never even thought about, like I wrote the whole story in 2017 and it's been sitting in a desk, right? It's been sitting on a shelf. It's like, I have not touched it in a long time, but I never thought about adapting it to a podcast. I was still thinking about it as like, oh, this is a book, this is a book, this is a book. But when they said that, I was literally sitting in the audience and I started thinking, oh my gosh, this would be an incredible podcast. It would be so fantastic and so much cheaper to make than a TV or a movie. And now we may see that, okay? Like this is one of those ideas that like hit me completely out of left field. I had no idea that this was inside of me, but stay tuned. Stay tuned for more details on that, okay? Because I may be adapting a fiction story into a podcast. I mean, we'll just see how that turns out. But my biggest takeaway was don't get so boxed into what your content can be that you aren't allowing it to be something more innovative or creative. So just throwing that out there. Like, let's think about all the possibilities because how fun is that, right? Your podcast could be a TV show. All right. Now let's move into should YouTube. I know that's a very weird talk. I was like, wait, I read it like 4 times. I was like, should YouTube? So this one was a candid discussion about increasing the push to video for podcasters. What does it cost? What's the return? Should you do it? And my biggest takeaway from this was if you have the capacity to create video and audio, you should do it. And there's a few reasons, and I've kind of preached this for a long time. One of the biggest ones is if you're on YouTube, the searchability and discoverability is just so much better. It really is. It is so much better than it is podcasting alone by itself, just in an audio format. So I love the idea of having your podcast on YouTube. And I'm actually playing around with some ways that I'm going to be doing this more. But at the end of the day, I believe video will help your podcast more than anything. So it's not going to hurt your show, right? It won't hurt to have video on YouTube, but it just may be something that you have to decide, do you have the bandwidth? And maybe it looks like just short video clips instead of full-blown video production, like a whole studio, multi-camera, like, a bunch of angles and cool lighting and everything. It could just be you recording a live stream and turning that into video clips or taking something that was actually one of the people that have been up there. He's been podcasting for over a decade and they do live streams Then they turn those, like they shorten them, and then they clean up the audio, turn it into a podcast. They turn it into shorter video clips. Then they turn those into shorter IG, TikTok. So it's like this full-blown production, which I love. I love this idea. I actually used to do this a lot, where I would live stream and then turn that into a podcast episode, turn it into a YouTube video, shorten it down and everything. So it was a great reminder that that's an option. And it's something I'm going to look into again in the future, because why did I ever stop doing that? Because it was fantastic. It was so great. And I could interact with my audience. So it's like you're hitting so many buttons whenever you have that kind of model. But I also know that live streaming isn't something that comes super natural to a lot of people, right? It's another hurdle to throw at you if you're not used to creating content that way. Okay, y'all, that is just day one. So day one had keynotes with Lance Bass, and Lance Bass from NSYNC. It was so fun to see him up on stage, and he was up there with an organization that represents the LGBTQ community in podcasting, which is like a subcategory of iHeart. So iHeart is where they house all of the shows that were represented on stage. And then they, within that, have a smaller community organization. And it was just so fun to see all of these people on stage that were representing a community of podcasters. I mean, I know that there's people that listen to this podcast that are within this subset. And I just love that they are getting the spotlight of, hey, we need more diverse voices. We don't just need, all the old white dudes up there talking about their experiences, because I think that that's what podcasting was for a really long time in the beginning. And all these underrepresented voices are getting their spotlight. So it was so fun to see Lance Bass. I mean, come on, like it was so fun. Jordan, shout out to Jordan. Jordan works over at Buzzsprout, and she's one of my friends that we've been podcasting nerds together for a long time. And I totally called her out on a recent episode of Buzzcast. This is Buzzsprout's podcast. And I was like, oh, Jordan was fangirling, like in the front row, taking all these pictures. And I was like just watching her and laughing because it was fun. It was fun. He hasn't aged a bit. We'll throw that out there. He has not aged a bit. Okay, let's move into day two. So Hollywood's screenwriting secrets for podcasters. This really piqued my interest and was such a fun talk because I love behind the scenes. So one of the reasons why I love Office Ladies, and I have been listening to The Last of Us. So if you've been watching that on HBO Max, it's kind of like, zombie apocalyptic kind of show. But I've been listening to all of their behind the scenes podcast. I listened to that one for the Just Like That series and The Gilded Age. Like HBO's doing a fantastic job of having all these behind the scenes podcasts. And they're so good. They're so, so good. And so whenever I saw this, Hollywood Screenwriting Secrets for Podcasters, this was a really awesome talk, and it was for beginners, but I like to go and listen to these to get some takeaways and tips to come back and share with you. And so let me tell you the description. It says, learn how to tell a compelling story on your podcast, fiction or nonfiction, from award-winning Hollywood writer and producer Jeffrey Schechter, an accomplished writer, showrunner, and entrepreneur. And he's going to show you the tips and techniques he's developed and successfully used over 3 decades of creating memorable and successful TV shows and films. So it was really cool to see that he had pictures from the showrunners, like the behind the scenes, the rooms of all of the writing rooms, because they have Post-its and these index cards that they put up everywhere. And to me, it reminded me of how I plan episodes in Asana and how I'll have like these ideas. I'll go in and like just put a brain dump of like, okay, here's an idea. I don't know when we're going to talk about it or what that episode looks like, but I'm putting it down. So there were a lot of different ways that you can really structure your episodes and stories. But some of the big takeaways that he shared, I wanted to share with you, is he talked about competition. He was like, who's your competition? No one. No one is your competition. And the reason why is because your story is different. What you have to share is different. So when you're thinking about what am I starting? How do I make it stand out? How can it be different? We recently talked about being in a saturated market from a Swapna's question on the podcast. And really it comes down to you don't really have any competition because you are you and your story is unique and what you're sharing is unique. And so don't think about it as who's my competition. Think about it in how am I standing out from all the other shows that are out there. And then the next thing he talked about is how should you think about your podcast? Well, you should think about your podcast like a TV show. And when he said this, I was like, hang on, that's like lots of money, big production, lots of team members. And he said, well, you have to think about it you have to be super organized in the planning and the execution. And he shared a lot of pictures on screen of, what it looks like. Like there's call sheets, there's templates, there's, a schedule, like a schedule down to the minute of what everybody is supposed to be doing on a given day. And I loved it. There's people listening right now that are just cringing, like, I don't want, like, that's too structured, too organized. I absolutely loved it because this is how I operate, more or less. Like every single day, I know what I'm doing every hour. And I just like that structure behind the scenes. And I think that it's one of the reasons why I've been able to continue podcasting and content creation over the last few years. And then the next one he talked about is the storytelling structure you should use for every podcast episode is theme. So theme is the container that gives your episode shape. And he actually shared 100 common themes that I'm going to share with you. So make sure you go to the show notes for this episode. But he shared all these different types of themes that you can use. And this could be, again, applied to fiction or nonfiction. But for instance, today's theme is all about education, right? I'm sharing with you the educational tips and strategies that I learned from Podcast Movement Evolutions. And I wanted to bring all of this to you because it is helpful. It's educational. I wanted to share it to my audience. So that is today's theme. But I'm going to share the common themes with you because I thought it was really interesting. And then the next one is how do TV shows crank out episodes with templates? Oh my gosh, this was so awesome. I love that he shared this because the templates, I totally get behind this. So if you don't know this, behind the scenes, I do so much planning in Asana, in Google Docs, Google Sheets. I have outlines, I have templates. Like I have so many things. Like I don't even recreate my show notes anymore. I go in and I clone those on my WordPress site. I have this plugin that allows me to clone an entire post. I don't create those from scratch. Y'all, if you didn't know this, like I go in, I click the clone button, and I am able to just recreate an entire episode every single time. And it's so important because I'm not starting from scratch. So throwing that out there, I'm a big fan of templates too. And then the last thing he's covered is how do you bring story structure to any template you use? And he talked about there's 4 archetypes. There's the orphan, the wanderer, the warrior, and the martyr. And this is kind of getting more into like the creative literary space of writing and creating story. But at the end of the day, I'm going to recommend that you are the warrior of your podcast. Because if you are creating content, then that means you either have the expertise to talk about what we're talking about. Maybe you're an expert. Maybe you taught this in the corporate world or you teach this in the corporate world or whatever you do. But your audience is more than likely going to be someone that wants to soak up what you're teaching them or what you're talking about. So in this scenario, I have to say that you're the warrior of your podcast. And doesn't that just sounds fun to say? Like, I'm the warrior of my podcast. So that was a really, really fun talk. All right. The next talk was all about how video podcasting is opening the door for listeners, creators, and advertisers alike. So again, with the theme of video podcasting. And this was actually requested from the Facebook group. People were like, can we please talk about video podcasting? I want to know more about it. And so this was a really interesting talk because again, I think that it's important to look at how people consume content, not just how you want to create it. I think that that's how you should start. I think that's how everybody should start. What do you want to create? And then look at, well, what is actually working, right? What are people doing today to consume content? And people love video. Let's be really honest. Like, it's really easy to sit down and watch a video and read the captions, even if you can't turn the audio on. And then people listen to audio whenever they're in the car, they're, working out, they're walking, they're doing stuff around the house. And so I think that video should be a component of your content, but it doesn't have to be the end all be all, the only thing that you're doing. But what they talked about specifically in this talk was the streaming of video is well documented and podcast may just be the next frontier. And so what they meant is video podcasts have created a new distribution medium for creators to amplify their voice. They have become a place for new content discovery, bringing net new listeners into the fold. And they have given advertisers, this is the key right here, the opportunity to connect with their audience in a way that is familiar to many TV and digitally native brands visually. In this session, we will unpack current video podcasting trends while also keeping an eye on the future of this rapidly evolving space. This one was so good because they shared things in there that I'd never thought about. So the way that I typically structure my YouTube content versus my podcast is I have been I'm going to do one and then do the other next time. So I would record the audio version with no video and then go back and record the video version with more buttoned up how to structure, less storytelling than I would do on the audio. And oh my gosh, like my brain's exploding just trying to explain this because the things that I talked about in advertising on video is so genius. Because if you're watching a video, you're on YouTube, there's going to be ads, right? If people have their channels monetized, you're probably going to be watching ads, but you could actually put ads within your video without disturbing what the video originally represents. So it's almost like having like those flash on the screen. I'm going to put something up that says, go to crystalprofit.com/course to buy my podcasting course. Like, that is an ad within the video, but I don't even have to say it. I could just pop it up visually on the screen at a certain time. So it's almost like product placement. But if you could do this in an organic way, or you could actually put in a video insert of an ad that is from a sponsor. So there's so many different ways that you can utilize video that you can't do in an audio space, because in audio, it's just like they can only hear it, right? You can't see what I'm doing. You can't see what I'm talking about in an audio only format, but visually you just have a lot more options. So it was very interesting. I'm actually going to be adding my podcast backlog to YouTube. I'm still trying to figure out what that looks like, but I'm going to go back. I'm going to go back and add so many episodes. I'm not going to add my entire backlog of the Profit Podcast to YouTube simply because there's things that aren't relevant to the audience that I'm talking to today. But there's going to be a lot of them. I mean, at this point, this is episode 396. It's almost 400 episodes. It's going to be an undertaking, but we're going to figure out. We're going to figure out how to do it because I think it's important. I think it's really important to do that. But one of the things that they also talked about is exclusive content is why SmartLess doesn't add content to YouTube, because this was one where their agent was there talking on stage. Again, I told y'all SmartLess had like this very big presence, and she was talking about they don't put content on YouTube because they want exclusivity. But the people listening to this and watching this, like, you're not trying to be exclusive you're trying to be everywhere, because that you're trying to reach an audience. You're trying to grow an audience. You're trying to grow your platform. So I don't think that that's the route for you to go. I think video, again, I know you're not happy about it, but video, you need it. You need it in some way. And we can talk about what that looks like. Okay. We have a few more. Oh my gosh, we have so much to catch up on. You know what? We are going to wrap this up today, and we're going to turn this into a 2-part series because this is a lot for one episode. And I want to do all of these justice because they deserve to, you deserve to hear this and me not rush through them. So we're just going to wrap this up today. So that's all I have for you. So if you enjoyed today's episode, make sure you are subscribed and following the podcast so you can get all of the other information that we share about content strategy and creating with confidence. Make sure you check out our previous episodes, our previous videos. And as always, remember, keep it up. We all have to start somewhere. Hey, Profit Podcast listeners, thanks for sticking around to a little bit after the episode to hear this special message because I want to hear from you. We are starting a new segment called Fan Mail Shoutouts, and I want to hear from you and I want to hear your questions. What do you want to know? What questions have you been dying to ask me? So here's how to make this happen. Go to the app where you're listening to this podcast right now. Go there. I'll wait a second. Okay. Now, once you're there, you're going to see a hyperlink at the top of the episode description that says, send Crystal a text message. And that's all I want you to do. Send me a text. It could be casual, informal. It could be totally anonymous. Or if you want, you can include your name and the name of your podcast or content wherever you are creating, and I will give you a special shout out in an upcoming episode. So again, go to the show notes for where you're listening to this episode right now, and it will say, send Crystal a text message. And I cannot wait to hear from you and give you a shout out in an upcoming segment of Fan Mail Shoutouts.